Good morning. It's Sunday, the Lord's Day. You know, it's been a big week here in this country, but hey, we got to keep moving. And that's one of the things that that's the thing I'm going to talk about this morning is moving. You've got to step out of your comfort zone. You know, I hope everybody's had a great week. I hope everybody's blessed this morning. If you're watching this, you've already received some blessings this morning when you woke up and you took that first breath and God got you up, started you on your way. This lesson is going to come from Acts chapter 7. There are a few places that I'm going to end up, looking at here, and I want to highlight because we often can get comfortable. We often get complacent when things are going good or the status quo. We don't want to rock the boat, but God will call you out of your comfort zone, call you out of a familiar place, and set your feet into uncharted territory. But now the thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we have faith, because we know that if he calls you into an area, he's going to be with you. God never calls us or tells us to do anything and that he doesn't give us the tools to do the job. He's not going to tell you to do a job and then say, hey, you figured out the best way you can. No, that's not what God does. We're going to see three examples in Acts chapter 7 of how God called people out of a comfort zone or what was familiar to them. And let's go ahead and get into it right quick. In Acts chapter 7, Stephen is addressing the Sanhedrin, okay? Because he's already been arrested, so he's addressing them. He's speaking for himself. He's defending himself, but he's bringing to remembrance things that they would have known from the old law, from the Old Testament, more specifically from the first 5 books of the Bible. It says, then he said unto the high priest, are these things so? And he said, men, brethren, fathers, hearken, which means listen. The God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia before he dwelt in Sharon. Well, let's just stop right there. There's some things contained in that one verse that we need to understand. Okay, it says God appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia before he dwelt in Sharon. A lot of times, God's going to he's going to call you while you're in your comfort zone, but that's going to mean you're going to have to step out of your comfort zone to do what he's asking you to do. In this case with Abraham, he was called out of his own land where he grew up, where he was raised up. Just like some of us, we have to move. Even though we may be in a comfortable place, even though we may be around people that we know, but when it's time for you to fulfill your God-given purpose, to do your God-given assignment, you're going to have to move. You've got to move. Yeah, you don't necessarily want to leave those people that are close to you, but guess what? God's got a purpose for you. And it's not about our will. It's not about our comfort. It's not about all that. It's about doing what he wants you to do for his purposes. And he's not going to just tell you to go somewhere and just leave you hanging, per se. He's not going to do that. What he's going to do is he's going to give you something even better. And in verse 3 it says, and he said unto him, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, and come into the land which I shall show thee. Then he came out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Sharon. And from thence, when his father was dead, he removed him into his land, wherein ye now dwell. And he gave him none inheritance in it, no, not so much as set his foot on it. Yet he promised that when he would give it, that he would give it to him for a possession and to his seed after him, when as yet he had no child. Here again, God's made you a promise. That's what he's saying. God made Abraham a promise when he didn't even have any kids. And he's talking about his seed. He didn't have any children. But when God promises you something, You can best believe if he promised it to you, he's going to perform it. It's not necessarily going to be on your timetable. It's on his timetable. And that's where a lot of frustration comes in at times when we want things done by a certain time that we think it should be done, and it's not. But even while we're waiting, we need to have faith and know that God's working on it, even as we may not necessarily see an outward result right now in this present moment, but he's working on it. No different than, you can go buy a seed. You can go buy seeds. You know what's supposed to come out of those seeds, but all you see is the seed. But when you bury that seed, you see nothing but ground. You know you buried it. You know you buried it. You know it's supposed to grow. But yet, you got to wait. Just as a farmer does, you got to wait. Just as a farmer does, so that it can come to fruition. That's the problem, is that we deal with a lot, myself included. I wanted things to happen at times, and it just didn't seem like it was happening fast enough. But at the end of the day, when I look back on those periods of time, God was still working. I just couldn't see it. And that's the thing that we have to realize. No matter what situation it is, we may not see the results now, but know and trust that God is working on it, even as we speak. Let's go a little further. Now, if we go on down to verse 9 and 10 of Acts chapter 7, it says, "And the patriarchs, moved with envy, sold Joseph into Egypt, but God was with him and delivered him out of all his afflictions and gave him favor and wisdom in the sight of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he made him governor over Egypt and all his house." Now, there's a lot of meat left on the bone right here, and we got to eat some of it right quick. Let's get into this verse. Now, it says, "And the patriarchs," which were Joseph's brothers, which were that's where the tribes of Judah get the tribes of Israel get their name, the 12 tribes, came from the 12 patriarchs, of which Jacob was their father. But now, if you remember back, Joseph told him a dream. He told him a dream. Now, he's a boy then. He's a boy. He was 17 years old, telling them this dream. Okay? He's a teenager. And all his older brothers. All his brothers were older. He was the baby boy. God showed him that dream while he was still at home. While he was still around his kindred. Just as Abraham was around his kindred, when God told him to, hey, you're going to have to get out of your land. Get out of this land. Move. Okay? So now, it says that they were moved with envy and sold Joseph into Egypt. A lot of times when people notice that you are blessed, that you have an ability, they can be envious because they may not have it. And they may seek to get rid of you. But we have a promise right here. But God was with him. No matter what people may do to you, when you're doing God's will, when you are doing God's work, He's going to provide for you. He's going to care for you. He's going to look out for you. Yes, it was wrong for what they did, but there was an ultimate purpose in it. Now, what was that ultimate purpose? The purpose was to protect Judah. It wasn't about Joseph at all, but it was to protect Judah. But we'll get into that at another time. Okay, now it says, "And delivered him out of all of his afflictions, and gave him favor and wisdom in the sight of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and he made him governor over Egypt and all his house." You see, your gift will bring you into the presence of great men. Your gift will make room for you. When God has his hands on you, and has placed a gift within you, he's not going to let it go to waste. He gave it to you for a reason, and you got to use it. But sometimes, circumstances like Joseph happened. What happened with Joseph? He got sold into Egypt. They thought they were doing him bad. But we know in the story, what they meant for bad, God meant it for his good. Not Joseph's good, but for his good and his purposes. And that's, we often quote Romans 8:28. All things work together for the good of those that love God and are called according to his purpose. Well, guess what? It didn't say your purpose. It said his purpose, meaning God's purpose. That's the thing we got to understand. Now, if you come down, we find another example in verse 20 through 23. It says, in which time Moses was born and was exceeding fair and nourished up in his father's house 3 months. And when he was cast out, Pharaoh's daughter took him up and nourished him for her own son. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds. But in verse 23, it tells us, and when he was a full 40 years old, it came to his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. Now, here we have Moses. He's a prince. He is a prince in the palace. He's mighty in words and deed. He can do anything he wants to do. He's been taught. He's been to school all his life, the finest schools, doing great works. As it says, mighty in works and deeds. Well, guess what? It doesn't matter how high you go. You may be doing great by the world standards, but when God has an ultimate purpose for you, you're going to have to leave that alone and do what he told you to do. You're going to have to move. It's all about moving. It's about the transition. We have to make that transition, and we have to have our minds set on not our purposes, but his purposes. Now we read further, and it talks about, the story of when he strove with the Egyptian, and then he ends up having to flee. But now remember, he was 40 years old. Good Lord willing, I'll be 40 in a couple of weeks. But that doesn't mean once you get a certain age, you can't change. And you cannot make a transition to another side of life. Or you may end up having to be in a position you never wanted to be in, but it's ultimately for your good and God's purposes. Now, we read a little bit further. It says that after he fled the Midian, and he begat 2 sons in verse 29, it says, and when 40 years were expired, there appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai an angel of the Lord in a flame of fire in a bush. So here we have, this is 40 more years have expired. Now Moses is 80 years old. Now he's moved to another land. He's fled to another land, started a family. And now here it is, God's going to tell him, hey, you're going to be the one that's going to deliver the people. Now, he made a major change when he was 40. 40 more years has come along. He's 80. God doesn't worry about your chronological age. He does not worry about that. How old you are physically does not determine what God's purpose is for you or if he can use you. That's what you have to understand. We have to be willing to be used by the master, no matter how old we are. And just as I mentioned earlier about the seed is comfortable in the soil. But if it was just meant to be in the soil, you'd never see anything. Just as we sometimes get buried by circumstances, events that we've dealt with, we get buried by those things. We get covered up by those things. But when God touches that seed and tells it to grow, it doesn't question him. It moves. It moves upward. It moves. The roots go down. The roots go down into the soil deeper to give it a firm foundation, which we have to have our foundation in the Word of God. And the seed moves up through the soil, through the trials, through the circumstances. And it comes to fruition. and makes itself manifest, for all to see. But you didn't see all that work that was going on behind the scenes or beneath the soil. And no matter where you are today, whether you feel like you've been covered up, or whether you're having to break through some trials and circumstances, or you might be on the other side of it and you've actually bloomed, always keep in mind, stay humble and make sure that you're doing what God called you to do. And as long as you do that, He's with you. Y'all have a good Sunday. Have a great week. And I'll talk to you all later. Good Lord willing. Bye now.